Johannesburg with me, Aubrey Mpofu. Let's now give you another reminder of our top stories this hour. The search for the 3-year-old girl who was swept away during a flash flood in Alexandra, north of Johannesburg on Wednesday has now resumed. Eskom will soon announce interim leadership arrangements, this following the resignation of the Power Utilities Chief Executive Brian Molefe yesterday. And still to come in this bulletin, more anti-Trump protests continue in the United States of America. Now, the world expects the United States to uphold its commitments under the landmark Paris Climate Treaty, despite Donald Trump's vow to pull out of it. Delegates from several countries have taken a wait-and-see attitude after the victory by the New York real estate developer who has vowed to pull the United States out of the hard-won deal 2 decades in the making. Under the Paris Pact, countries have submitted voluntary pledges to cut the greenhouse gas emissions that cause dangerous global warming. The agreement commits nations to collectively cap the Earth's average temperature increase at under 2 degrees Celsius. And now for more on the Climate Change Summit, we are now joined via Skype by our correspondent Sarah Kimani. She joins us from Marrakesh in Morocco. Sarah, nice to chat to you once again. Do delegates there in Marrakesh, Sarah, really expect that the United States President-elect Donald Trump will honor the Paris Agreement?
Good afternoon, Aubrey. Well, he has indeed dominated part of the talks since his election, and a lot of delegates are worried. There's mixed reactions. Delegates from the U.S. saying that he has no choice but to keep to the promises and the binding agreement of the Paris Agreement. The Chinese coming out very strongly to say there is no turning back. Indeed, saying most of the times the U.S. and other global superpowers and polluters have had a wait-and-see kind of thing and waited to see whether China will act. They're saying now relationships between the U.S. and China will depend on what Trump decides about the Paris Agreement, which during this coming week, the delegates here will start writing a rule book on how to implement the Paris Agreement. And so they're saying he has no choice but to stick to the binding agreements of that agreement. And they're saying that he also has to continue funding the developing nations, and especially Africa, in terms of the money needed to adapt to climate change and to mitigate against the effects of climate change.
Mm-hmm. But Sarah, the biggest world polluters, amongst them China and possibly India, are still signatories to this agreement. But what then would be the impact of a U.S. pull-out from this agreement?
Well, they are playing down a possible U.S. pullout, but they're saying that even if the U.S. pulls out, the rest of the countries will continue. Indeed, one of the negotiators from the U.S. said one of the things that would happen is if the U.S. pulled out at this point, the rest of the world will continue without them, and Trump, President-elect Trump, will find it very difficult to negotiate with other countries on other key issues that are of interest to the U.S. And so they're saying it is the interest of the U.S., both economically, politically, and socially, to continue with the agreement as it is, and in fact to start giving out saying this is our national determined climate change decisions, and this is how much we intend to reduce our greenhouse gases by this and this period. So they're saying there is no turning back now.
Now, COP22 is still going ahead in Marrakesh, Sarah. So what is being discussed, what is being considered at the present moment, and what agreements have also been reached thus far?
Well, what is now going to be discussed is how to implement the Paris Agreement. There's one issue that will, of course, take a lot of the time here, and that is called the nationally determined contributions to reduce emissions. This is where countries will decide, give a timeline of how they intend to reduce greenhouse gases and how they hope to cap the rising temperatures in their countries and on the globe. That will take part of the meeting. And also, they will now start talking about how will the rule book be written, how will we hold countries to account if they're not doing what is agreed on the Paris Agreement. For Africa, they will be looking to see whether developed world here will now commit to giving $100 billion every year by 2020, because they say, although they are the least polluters, they suffer the greatest effects of climate change. And so they will be pushing countries here to be transparent in how they distribute this money, and also to ensure that the money is consistent and it can be relied on the sidelines of the meeting, African countries are talking about renewable energy. There is a huge push towards renewable energy here, with African countries actually having formed the African Renewable Energy Initiative, and they'll be trying to see if more money can come into that during the climate change conference.
Now, besides the issue of funding and renewable energy, is there anything else that Africa, together with the other developing countries, are pushing for at COP22? Very briefly.
Yes, they will be pushing for what they're calling smart agriculture, where African farmers will be looking to now move away from just the usual agriculture they do, but the agriculture that can help them adapt to the effects of climate change. This is through using better seeds, smart irrigation methods, so that now they can still be able to be food secure despite climate change.
All right, thank you so much. That was our correspondent there, Sarah Kimani, coming to us live via Skype from Marrakesh in Morocco at the COP22. Now, the United States is in uproar over Republican Donald Trump's surprise presidential election victory. 3 days after Trump's win, hundreds of anti-Trump protesters descended on the streets of Miami, Florida, and Atlanta, Georgia, to voice their discontent. In Miami, hundreds of protesters marched peacefully, holding up anti-Trump banners with